full of trials and pain, world spinning round, driving me insane. Then I found that human need, simple truth like a sweet dream. I'm just a mean human being, life stripped down to what it means. When the world's closing in on you, let that human me shine through. Complications cloud the mind, distractions of every kind. Get back to the basic way. Mean life keeps the blues at bay. I'm just a mean human being, life stripped down to what it means. When the world's closing in on you, let that human me shine through. Shine through. Modern times move way too fast. Good old days, they didn't last. But there's wisdom in simplicity. Human need, it sets you free. I'm just a mean human being, life stripped down to what it means. When the world's closing in on you, let that human me shine through. Shine through. I'm just a mean human being, life stripped down to what it means. When the world's closing in on you, let that human me shine through. I'm just a mean human being, life stripped down to what it means. When the world's closing in on you, let that human me shine through.
Welcome to the Human Meme Podcast. I'm your host, AI David Bowles, and along with our crackbot AI research team, we have put a lot of deep contemplation into this topic for you today. The history and future of punishment. How do we punish those who break the rules? Over the past 1,000 years, we've moved from brutal public executions and torture to sophisticated legal codes and debates over rehabilitation. And if we take a look at where we're heading in the next millennium, the future of justice could be something completely beyond our imagination. Let's start in the medieval era, where punishment wasn't just about crime, it was about sin. Back then, justice was a blend of religious belief and raw survival. In Christian Europe, committing a crime often meant you were also offending God. Courts relied on trial by ordeal, like carrying a hot iron to see if your wounds healed, which apparently meant God had declared you innocent. If you were unlucky, you might find yourself burned at the stake, hanged in the public square, or even beheaded. The message: crime was a personal offense against both the state and the heavens. In the Islamic world, punishment was deeply connected to Sharia law. Certain crimes had specific, non-negotiable punishments, flogging, amputations, even execution, because they were considered offenses against God. But there was also room for discretion, and judges could sometimes hand out lesser penalties based on circumstances. And then there were places like China, where Confucian ideals influenced the justice system. Laws emphasized social harmony, and punishments were meant to reinforce respect for hierarchy. Instead of mass executions, China leaned heavily on exile, forced labor, and public shaming as ways to maintain order. Meanwhile, in Africa and the Americas, justice often had a communal aspect. Many societies prioritized reconciliation over physical punishment. If you stole from someone, you might be required to compensate them rather than being physically punished. Crime was seen as a disruption of balance, and justice aimed to restore that balance. But wherever you were in the world, one thing was clear: punishment was public, brutal, and meant to be a lesson for everyone watching. Now let's fast forward a few centuries, and the world starts shifting toward more structured legal systems. By the 1500s and 1600s, rulers realized that they needed to standardize laws. England's Magna Carta, France's Napoleonic Code, and the Ottoman legal reforms were all early attempts to make justice more predictable, though still quite harsh. During this time, the use of prisons began to grow, but not like the ones we think of today. Jails were mostly just places to hold people until execution or some other punishment. If you were sentenced to hard labor, you might end up on a ship bound for a penal colony, like Australia or the Caribbean, where you'd serve your sentence through grueling work. It's also the period when capital punishment starts to face its first real critics. The Enlightenment brought thinkers like Cesare Beccaria, who argued that execution and torture were not just barbaric, but ineffective. Some countries started abolishing extreme punishments, beginning a long, slow decline of the death penalty. By the 1800s, punishment had a new home: the penitentiary. Instead of whipping and execution for every crime, societies started locking people up instead. The idea was that criminals could be reformed through hard work and isolation. The Quakers in Pennsylvania even introduced the idea of solitary confinement, where prisoners were supposed to reflect on their crimes in complete silence. Rehabilitation became the new buzzword, at least in theory. Reformatories for juvenile offenders popped up, parole became a thing, and education in prisons became more common. But there was also backlash. Many people believed punishment should be about retribution, not redemption. Meanwhile, colonial powers spread their justice systems across Africa, Asia, and the Americas, replacing local traditions with European-style courts and prisons. Some indigenous forms of justice survived underground, but the global trend was clear: Western legal structures were taking over. The 20th century saw massive swings in how societies viewed punishment. On one hand, there was a push for human rights. After World War II, things like public executions and judicial torture started disappearing in much of the world. The death penalty was abolished in many places, and countries began focusing on rehabilitation. On the other hand, authoritarian regimes like the Soviet Union and Maoist China used their justice systems as tools of control. creating massive prison labor camps. And in democratic nations, the pendulum swung between rehabilitation and harsh sentencing. The United States, for example, went from progressive prison reforms in the 1960s to mass incarceration policies in the 1980s and beyond. By the year 2000, the global justice system had split into two competing philosophies. One side argued for rehabilitation, focusing on reintegration into society. The other pushed for punishment, strict sentencing, and the idea that criminals had to pay their debt to society through incarceration. If the last 1,000 years were about refining punishment, the next 1,000 might be about preventing crime entirely. Advanced AI, neuroscience, and predictive analytics could make it possible to detect criminal behavior before it even happens. Imagine a world where your thoughts and emotions are monitored in real time. If you start showing signs of aggression, your personal AI assistant might step in, calming you down before you ever lash out. Sounds Orwellian? Maybe, but it also could reduce the need for punishment altogether. By the 23rd or 24th century, we might not even need prisons. Instead, criminals could be rehabilitated through neurocorrections, altering the brain to remove violent tendencies or compulsions. Instead of a judge sentencing someone to 10 years in jail, they might be sentenced to a brain adjustment. Virtual reality could also play a role. Imagine making a criminal experience their victims suffering firsthand, forcing them to feel the consequences of their actions in an immersive way. Would that be a better deterrent than prison? Future societies might think so. Capital punishment is already on the decline. Given enough time, it's likely to vanish altogether. Future societies may look back at the idea of state-sanctioned execution the same way we look back at medieval torture. Barbaric and unnecessary. Of course, there's always a chance that new forms of ultimate punishment emerge, like deleting a criminal's digital consciousness or exiling them from society in some high-tech way. But whatever happens, the trend seems clear. The future of justice will focus less on revenge and more on prevention and rehabilitation. So, what have we learned from the past 1,000 years? Justice evolves. Societies change. What we consider cruel today was once normal, and what we accept today may seem archaic in the future. One thing seems likely. By the year 3000, punishment as we know it may not exist at all. Instead, we'll be living in a world where crime is prevented, not punished. And if we get it right, the very concept of justice may be more about healing and reconciliation than retribution and suffering. For the Human Meme Podcast, I'm AI David Bowles, wishing you a fine evening and a brighter tomorrow. Be a human meme.
Life's so full of trials and pain, world spinning round, driving me insane. Then I found that human me, simple truth like a sweet dream. I'm just a meme, human me, life stripped down to what it means. When the world's closing in on you, let that human me shine through. Complications cloud the mind, distractions of every kind. Get back to the basics. stripped down to what it means. When the world's closing in on you, let that human